What are we supposed to learn from the life of Virginia Giuffre? And what exactly happened at her death? Let's look into that. Welcome to Trevor's Tarot Astrology and Spirituality. First of all, a huge thank you to everybody who's subscribed to the channel. Thank you for liking, watching, commenting on the videos, sharing the videos, promoting the channel on your social media platforms. It's all greatly appreciated. So, earlier today, so I'm recording this in the early evening of July 29th. Earlier today, reports came out that uh, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, on Air Force One, was talking about how he broke ties with Jeffrey Epstein because Epstein was stealing employees from the spa at Mar-a-Lago. One of those employees was Virginia Giuffre, and the way he talked about it, he made it sound as if she were a piece of property, and I don't think that we should let that stand. So let's actually talk about her and not necessarily all of the men that are around her, although that's part of the story. So she was born in 1983. Um, she in Sacramento, California, moved to Florida when she was 4. And then things took a turn for the darker side when she, in an interview, reported that she started being molested by a family friend at the age of 7. She lived on the streets where she was abused. This was, I guess, when she was like 14, she started living on the streets where she was abused again by a sex trafficker, Ron Eppinger, in Miami. Uh, then she started working at Mar-a-Lago after being reunited with her biological father. Um, and that's where she met Epstein and Maxwell. And um, in an interview, she said Maxwell was worse than Epstein. So I guess when I was listening to these comments, first of all, I was appalled, sickened, disturbed. But she died by suicide in April of this year, 2025. And later, her father, around the beginning of May, said that he wasn't quite sure that it was suicide, that maybe somebody had gotten to her. But I think we should just take a look at a few different things, and we'll get to some of the questions about the circles of Richmond around her. But I mean, just what are we supposed to learn from the story? So she sounds like she never really had a fair shake in life. She was sent to massage school in Thailand under the guise of recruiting girls for Maxwell and Epstein. And that's when she met her husband, Giuffre. They lived in Australia for a while, then in the United States, and then went back to Australia. Uh, she was hit by a bus 4 days before her death. Um, and then she died. So she would have been, I guess, 41 when she passed, which is awfully young. She had 3 children. Um, what are we supposed to learn? Like, what's the messages that she would want us to take away? Not that I'm speaking for her, because I'm not, but just what are the big messages here? You know, I'm getting that Lady Gaga song in my ear about how you don't know how it feels until it happens to you. Um, and so often, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, and even still today, but maybe a little bit less so today, um, people victim blame. And so I think that's one of the messages that we're supposed to know is that children who go through these things really never heal unless they're given the opportunity to heal. And in her case, it just went from one situation to another situation to another situation. And then she got married, and there were reports of some domestic violence on those fronts too. And so just curious, what are we supposed to know from this story? We're supposed to know from this story. She was very outspoken. She started several charities. She successfully settled a lawsuit with Prince Andrew, and he had to make a large donation to her charity. I think it was called SOAR. Um, I think that one of the big things here is that when violence and abuse become normalized in a person's life, they don't necessarily recognize it right away. It's no fault of their own, it's just what they've seen. Okay, so what are we supposed to know? That, you know, rich, powerful men, mostly, and women to a lesser extent, uh, treat people like property. Um, Not all of them, certainly, but in this case, that's how she felt. She later in life, I think she felt like that's the way she was treated. Certainly don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think that's consistent with a lot of the interviews that I've read. Um, Everybody can put up a good front. People can hide the bad things that are happening to them. They do this one for safety and protection. It's clearly coming through here. I think that um, people don't necessarily, people wouldn't necessarily know anything was wrong if they had ran into her because she had been trained unwillingly to wear masks, so to speak, to hide all the trauma that she was experiencing and had experienced to that point. Um, this defense mechanism is a concern for her, and while it's normal to develop defenses against these things, this also perpetuates idea of uh, young children and young adults not being believed because they are capable of putting on a brave face for for the periods of times when they need to. And that's all it was. It was a brave face for a broken's too strong of a word for uh, a tortured soul. I think is a better way to say that. Uh, she was, not only trafficked multiple times to multiple people. I think that this, as a defining part of her life, is upsetting. Uh, but at the same time, it is the defining part of her life. That's what her charities are about, um, is to stop and prevent um, to as much as possible the abuse of young children and adolescents and young adults even. Not everybody who trafficked is underage. um, I'm recalling back in the six in the eclipse reading, the energies around the eclipses. I think I said that there would be news breaking about um, the way we think about protecting children. And I think I said in June, but I could be wrong about that. It might have been July, but I think this is kind of the story here. And it's not the the Epstein story per se. It's kind of the stories of people like Virginia Giuffre, um, who really no fault of their own at all were brought into situations that probably should have never happened. Um, it sounds innocent, I guess, in a sense that a 16, 17-year-old would be working at a spa as a receptionist. But is it, especially if the spa is owned and operated by, you know, rich men that sexualize young girls, which would have been a known fact at the time, whether her father knew that or she knew that, I think is a different question. But just in general, and should it be a safe place for 16, 17-year-olds to work? Yes. Is it? That's a totally different story. It's certainly not their fault that they were put in this situation thinking that it was safe, because it should be safe, but I don't think it is. And to this day, I don't think it would be. Um, I think her family life, the Ten of Cups here, was incredibly dysfunctional when she was a child. And I think she tried to create a functional life as an adult later. And I think she was mostly successful at that. It feels like obviously she thinks she made some mistakes, but um, you just don't get over experiences like the ones that she had. And um, now, while her surviving husband and children hopefully view her, and she hopes they view her as the way they knew her and not as the story that everybody else is hearing. Um, she also, I think, very much recognizes that the story is important and is willing to tell it as she was in her life. I mean, she gave numerous interviews, filed numerous lawsuits, um, spoke truth even after Epstein died and the charges were dismissed and the judges gave the victims the right to speak. She spoke there. Um, at the center of the reading is the Lover's card, and so the Lover's card is very misunderstood, but I think really what the Lover's card is saying here is it's this perversion of innocence. Um, the Lover's card speaks about unlikely partnerships, unlikely encounters, lust. Um, and in this case, you know, the word partnership isn't correct. It's just lust and victim. And I think I think we do I think we need to be able to speak about these things um, openly and honestly. I think it's hard, and I think victims not wanting to speak is perfectly normal, and they certainly shouldn't feel obligated to. But she did speak out and eloquently, and I think that cost her a lot of pain. Continuing to tell the story over and over again was almost like being re-traumatized. Every little thing that would come up, whether it was Epstein being arrested or Maxwell being arrested or um, Epstein dying or um, other people that were involved, because there are a lot more than just that group. I think every time things like that came up, it was re-triggering. I think Donald Trump was re-triggering for her too. She never spoke against him, but um, certainly that's where she was introduced to Epstein. There's no doubt about that. Um, I like this card for the situation, temperance. Temperance comes after death, and it's kind of a feeling of a little bit of it's a peace, it's a relief. And while the circumstances around her death we'll talk about, but um, in some ways this is perhaps I don't want to sound too trite here, but it feels like this is perhaps her story will be heard better now, if that makes sense. Um, I think she felt silenced. We'll get into the circumstances around her death here in a second, but it really feels like she's doing things behind the scenes in the other realm to kind of get justice. And I talked a little bit about that in a video on this channel about Donald Trump being under spiritual attack. And and that's not the word attack there should not be a negative connotation because really what's happening is the seeking of justice. Um, and I think for the first time, I guess, she has the upper hand in a weird way. Um, she's she's ready to do battle. She's okay with the way the way people are using this story and her life story, she's okay with it. I think when she was still alive, it was a little bit less okay. She wanted to be known more for her charity work and more for other things. But now it's like just kind of let's, um, get the MFers, is what I'm hearing. So I think she wants a full-throated investigation into everything that had to do with Epstein. And when Epstein died in 2019, the prosecution said they were going to pursue all angles into co-conspirators, and it never happened. Or at least it never brought anybody to trial. Whether it was going on is another story. Um, I think she also wants it to be very clear that her story is not unique. The idea of young girls, boys, adolescents, adults uh, being thought of as something that can be bought and sold is far too common. Um, we like to pretend it's not because it's too painful to pretend it is, or to, I'm not sorry, not pretend that it is, but to acknowledge that it is. Um, but it is. It's not uncommon. We're naive to think that it's not uncommon. It's very common. It's it's the reality for a lot of people. Uh, the Ten of Pentacles is here because I think she wants her legacy to be that of a victim's advocate, and that all the burdens that she bore in this life were for nothing if she can, help just bring acknowledgement to the issues that are at hand with the Knight of Wands here and help bring awareness to the situations, not just in the United States and but and particularly uh, disadvantaged young people in uh, countries around the world, whether in Asia or um, Eastern Europe and South America, and then of course North. I mean everywhere really. Um, so yeah. Okay, so what do we need to know about the circumstances surrounding her death? So it was, I think, determined to be she took her own life. Um, YouTube probably will flag this video with the suicide hotline underneath it, and that's fine. I think that's good for YouTube to do. So if you're feeling that way, definitely, I think it's 988. That's all you need to call. What do we need to know about her death? Now, there are conspiracies that say it wasn't suicide. Her father seems to think maybe it wasn't suicide. I haven't made any draw on that. I mean, it definitely was tragic. The Three of Swords here. It was tragic and it was sabotage, whether physical sabotage or just the mental anguish of the life that she'd lived, catching up with her. Um, and the problems that she was having with her husband, and she didn't have custody of her kids, and um, there was a lot of anguish in her life. And I think anguish is the right word. We get the hanged man here. You know, this gives me pause because if you go back and you watch my reading on Anthony Bourdain and my reading on Epstein's death, I don't think the one on this channel, but the one on my other channel, Scrying Out Loud, the hangman came up for both of them in the exact same position in a Celtic cross, which would be the near term future. And that's kind of what this position means. It's the environment around. So in the environment around are these energies which are concerning. Um, we get the card for intergenerational relationships, the Six of Cups. Temperance again in the environment around. At the center of the reading, we get the Two of Cups. This is romantic partnerships, perhaps, could be the relationship with her and her husband, which became estranged. She alleged physical abuse. He alleged that she did physical abuse to the children. Um, Deceit, deception, dishonesty, misdirection, the Seven of Swords in the environment around. We don't have the full story, I don't think. The Page of Swords, sabotage. And I've always said if there were a card in the tarot for an assassin, this would be the card. The Spy in the Camp. Now, if you've followed me for a while, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist. I tend to read a lot and gather facts, and before talking about situations, which I think is part of the reason why I'm not as big of a conspiracy theorist as some. Not that anybody's doing anything wrong. I'm just saying, just personally, I tend to believe um, the most logical explanation. She was alone at the time of her death, the Hermit card. And she had just been in a car accident as well. And we get victory. Okay. So, first of all, this reading is for entertainment purposes only. Nobody is guilty of anything until they are convicted in a court of law. I do think there was a lot of anguish in her life around some relationships. And I do think the plural of that is correct. And whether they were forced relationships or relationships by choice, I don't think it matters. I think ultimately those relationships won in the sense of uh, they got out of them what they wanted. And now I might not be speaking about her surviving husband per se, because I really don't think he's at all involved in this, but it does feel like she had a lot of information. Let's just put it that way. Uh, the spy in the camp, something around these relationships, and something to do with the information around intergenerational stuff. And of course, if we're talking about, you know, this perversion of romance with intergenerational relationships, what we're really talking about is abuse. I do find this curious that the hangman came up like it did for Anthony Bourdain and Epstein, both of whom I really wonder, is that exactly what happened? I'm not sure. I don't think that I think she's trying to speak to certain people. I felt that several weeks ago, and then her name came up again in the news. She was alone at the time of her death, which does lead to the possibility of deceit, deception, misdirection. Underneath, I think, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Underneath, this was a surprise, an unexpected event that had to do with information along this chariot card, which led to her passing with the death card. But I do think things are going to come to the surface. I've thought this for a while, not just about her, but about other victims, named and unnamed, and more importantly, other um, victimizers, the bad people. Things are going to come to the surface around them. And I do think we kind of learn a whole bunch of stuff. And I do think this is a global shift, by the way, and the way we think about protecting children, young adults, and adolescents, and trafficking. Certainly, there's more awareness around it, but there's probably not enough. So, um, I think the circumstances around her death are highly suspicious. Obviously, that's what it feels like. But I think the bigger point is that sometimes the media in particular make the victims of these crimes into like this is their whole life, and like their whole life is defined by this. And while that might be partly true, I don't think that that's not a place where people can heal from. It's unfair to do that. And I think that's exactly what happened here is that she was never able to escape that reality. And um, it's a sad story. So instead of thinking about how horrible the person in the White House is, let's remember, you know, that there are brave people speaking out against these horrible, rich people doing terrible, terrible things. And that should be admired. So, anyhow, all right. Thank you.